In 2010, model Eliza Samudio vanished after confronting her ex, football star Bruno Fernandes, for child support. What followed was a shocking crime, kidnapping, torture, and murder that exposed the dark side of celebrity. Today, we dive into the chilling details behind one of Brazil's most infamous cases. If you're into true crime stories like this one, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into shocking cases. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Eliza Samudio was a young Brazilian model who found herself in the spotlight for reasons far beyond her career. She had aspirations in the modeling industry and had previously worked in adult entertainment, but her life took a dramatic turn after meeting Bruno Fernandes de Souza. Bruno at the time was a rising star in Brazilian football. He was the captain and goalkeeper for Flamengo, one of the country's most prominent football clubs, and was widely regarded as one of the best goalkeepers in Brazil. With fame, wealth, and an impressive career ahead, Bruno was considered a household name in Brazilian sports. Their paths crossed in 2009, and what began as a casual relationship quickly turned complicated. Eliza became pregnant with Bruno's child, a situation that Bruno reportedly did not welcome. According to various accounts, Bruno pressured Eliza to have an abortion, something she refused. Their relationship soured further as Eliza decided to keep the child and pursue legal recognition of Bruno as the father. In February 2010, Eliza gave birth to a son, a boy she named Bruno after his father. The birth of their child only deepened the conflict between her and Bruno. Eliza's attempts to secure child support became the focal point of the tension. She sought legal action to compel Bruno to acknowledge the child and provide financial assistance, which Bruno vehemently resisted. Eliza spoke openly about the difficulties she faced, sharing with friends and authorities that Bruno had threatened her, and she expressed concern for her safety. In the months leading up to her disappearance in June 2010, Eliza Samudio found herself in an escalating conflict with Bruno Fernandes. After giving birth to their son, Bruninho, in February of that year, Eliza had been pressing Bruno to recognize the child legally and provide financial support. She was also in the process of seeking a DNA test to prove paternity. This had put significant pressure on Bruno, who feared that the scandal could damage his flourishing football career. By early June 2010, Eliza was staying in Rio de Janeiro, still pursuing legal action against Bruno. She had expressed growing concerns for her safety to both friends and authorities. Eliza had told close confidants that Bruno had been threatening her, warning her to drop the paternity case. She confided in a friend that Bruno had explicitly told her that he would ruin her life if she didn't stop. In earlier police reports, Eliza had accused Bruno of attempting to force her into having an abortion, which had already led to violent altercations between them during her pregnancy. In mid-June 2010, Eliza traveled to Belo Horizonte, allegedly under the belief that Bruno was finally willing to settle the dispute over child support and discuss his relationship with their son. However, this trip would mark the beginning of a chain of events that led to her tragic death. Upon arrival in Belo Horizonte, Eliza was taken to a house owned by Bruno's associate, Luis Henrique Romao, known as Macau. This house would become the scene of her final hours alive. Eliza was last seen on June 4, 2010. According to later testimonies, she was forcibly taken from the house, beaten and tortured. Macau and others involved in the crime stated that Bruno had ordered them to carry out the kidnapping and murder as a way to solve the problem Eliza was causing with the child support demands. They claimed that Eliza had been strangled to death and that her body was dismembered and fed to dogs in an effort to completely erase evidence of the crime. Before her disappearance, Eliza had been in frequent contact with friends and had sent messages expressing fear for her life. She had reportedly told friends that Bruno was capable of violence and that she was worried about what might happen if he continued to be pushed. Her final known communication came around the time of her abduction, after which all contact with her ceased. Eliza had also filed a formal complaint with the police earlier in 2009 after the first violent confrontation with Bruno, but despite the seriousness of the allegations, it wasn't enough to prevent the events that unfolded. Her repeated warnings to friends about feeling threatened, combined with the prior police reports, painted a clear picture of the danger she felt. Sadly, her concerns proved to be justified as she became the victim of a premeditated murder orchestrated by someone she had once trusted. The investigation into Eliza Samudio's disappearance began in late June 2010, 3 weeks after she was last seen. Initially, the case was treated as a missing person investigation, but authorities quickly grew suspicious due to the strained relationship between Eliza and Bruno Fernandes, the father of her child. Given Bruno's high-profile status as a professional footballer, the case attracted widespread media attention from the start. Police began by interviewing people close to Eliza as well as individuals connected to Bruno. Eliza had previously filed a police report in 2009 accusing Bruno of physically assaulting her, which set the tone for investigators who now believed her disappearance could be linked to violence. As police dug deeper, they discovered that Eliza's last known location was a property owned by Luis Henrique Romao, also known as Macarao, one of Bruno's closest associates. This raised red flags about Bruno's involvement, and investigators began focusing on his inner circle. The breakthrough in the case came when a key witness came forward, Bruno's teenage cousin, a 17-year-old at the time, who had been living in Bruno's house. The boy confessed to police that he had been involved in Eliza's kidnapping and provided chilling details about what had happened. According to his testimony, Bruno had ordered Eliza to be taken to the house in Belo Horizonte where she was held against her will. He claimed that Eliza had been bound, beaten, and tortured before being killed. The cousin revealed that the plan was devised by Bruno and Macarao to permanently silence Eliza, who had been seeking child support and recognition for her son. The boy further explained that Eliza had been strangled to death in the house, and her body was later taken to a remote location. The most disturbing part of his testimony was the revelation that Eliza's body had been dismembered, and according to the cousin and other witnesses, the remains were fed to dogs in an attempt to completely eliminate any trace of her. Police were able to corroborate much of the cousin's testimony with evidence found at the house, including traces of blood and other forensic indicators that supported the claim that a violent crime had occurred there. However, the absence of a body made the case more difficult to prosecute, and investigators relied heavily on the testimonies of those involved to piece together the events of Eliza's final days. As the investigation continued, other individuals connected to Bruno began cooperating with the authorities. Luis Henrique Romao, Bruno's friend and right-hand man, admitted that he had been directly involved in the kidnapping and murder, following Bruno's instructions. His testimony, alongside that of Bruno's cousin, provided crucial details about the planning and execution of the crime. Macarao described how they had transported Eliza to the house where she was tortured, and later how they disposed of her remains. Witnesses also provided key evidence implicating Bruno directly. They described how Bruno had been the mastermind behind the operation, instructing his associates to solve the problem Eliza posed by making sure she disappeared. Multiple individuals testified that Bruno had been present during parts of the ordeal and had actively participated in planning her death. The brutality of the crime shocked even seasoned investigators as it became clear that the killing had been premeditated and executed with an intent to completely erase any evidence. Despite Bruno's initial denials, the growing number of testimonies from his co-conspirators made it impossible for him to maintain his innocence. The police had built a strong case, centered on the witness statements, forensic evidence from the crime scene, and the confessions of those involved. Bruno was eventually arrested and charged with orchestrating Eliza Samudio's kidnapping, torture, and murder. The gruesome detail that Eliza's body had been fed to dogs became one of the most widely reported aspects of the case, further fueling public outrage. Although her remains were never fully recovered, the testimonies of Bruno's cousin and Macarao left little doubt about her fate. The case highlighted the importance of witness cooperation, as the accounts provided by Bruno's inner circle were crucial in building the case against him and securing justice for Eliza. Without a body or direct physical evidence, these testimonies became the backbone of the prosecution's case, ensuring that Bruno and his accomplices would be held accountable for their horrific crime. As the investigation unfolded, Bruno continued to maintain his innocence despite mounting evidence. Even when his teenage cousin came forward with a confession detailing the involvement of Bruno and his associates in Eliza's kidnapping and murder, Bruno refused to change his stance. He described the accusations as fabrications and continued to publicly dismiss any claims linking him to the crime. However, the tide began to turn as more individuals from Bruno's inner circle started to cooperate with police. On July 7, 2010, Bruno was formally arrested. Police had gathered enough evidence to charge him with orchestrating the kidnapping, torture, and murder of Eliza Samudio. His arrest came after weeks of intense media speculation, following the confessions from his cousin and close friend, Luis Henrique Romao, also known as Macarao. Romao had admitted to playing a direct role in the crime, claiming that he had acted under Bruno's orders. According to Romao, Bruno had been heavily involved in the planning of the crime and had instructed his associates to take care of the situation, referring to Eliza's demands for child support. In addition to Romao, other individuals linked to Bruno were arrested and charged, including his cousin and several employees who had helped carry out the crime. These associates provided critical information about Bruno's involvement, corroborating key details from the investigation. Witnesses described how Bruno had been present during key moments of the ordeal and had played a significant role in directing his associates to handle Eliza. The testimonies implicated Bruno as the mastermind behind the plot to eliminate Eliza and prevent her from pursuing legal action against him. The arrest of a prominent football star like Bruno Fernandes was a media sensation. News outlets across Brazil and even internationally covered the case extensively, with reporters stationed outside police stations, courts, and Bruno's properties. The gruesome details of Eliza's death, particularly the allegations that her body had been dismembered and fed to dogs, shocked the public. These revelations, combined with Bruno's initial attempts to portray himself as innocent, fueled widespread outrage. As the media frenzy grew, Bruno's image as a beloved football icon began to unravel. His denial of involvement, which had initially seemed plausible to some fans, crumbled under the weight of the evidence presented by authorities. The public reaction was swift and unforgiving. Supporters who had once idolized Bruno turned against him, condemning his alleged actions. The case ignited broader conversations about domestic violence, abuse of power, and the dark side of celebrity culture in Brazil. News channels, newspapers, and social media platforms were flooded with updates about the case as more details emerged about Bruno's involvement in the horrific nature of Eliza's death. The public was captivated by the dramatic fall of one of Brazil's most well-known football players, and the case dominated headlines for months. Public figures and women's rights activists also weighed in, using the case as an example of the need for stronger protections for women and greater accountability for those in positions of power. As Bruno remained in custody, the legal process moved forward, with prosecutors building their case around the testimonies of his associates, forensic evidence, and Bruno's own actions in the days leading up to and following Eliza's disappearance. Despite his continued claims of innocence, the overwhelming evidence pointed to his involvement in the crime. In the weeks following his arrest, Bruno's football career came to a halt. Flamengo, the club he had played for, immediately suspended him, and his lucrative sponsorship deals were canceled. His once promising future in football was effectively over as his name became synonymous with one of the most heinous crimes in Brazil's recent history. Bruno Fernandes' involvement in the murder of Eliza Samudio not only ended his football career, but also sparked a national conversation about justice and the consequences of unchecked power. His arrest marked the beginning of a long legal process that would eventually lead to his conviction, but it also left an indelible mark on Brazil, where the case remains one of the most notorious examples of celebrity criminal behavior. The trial of Bruno Fernandes for the murder of Eliza Samudio began in November 2012, more than 2 years after her disappearance and death. The case had garnered significant media attention, and by the time the trial started, public interest had reached its peak. The court proceedings took place in a highly charged atmosphere, with reporters closely covering every detail and the courtroom packed with observers. Given the gravity of the crime and Bruno's high-profile status as a former football star, the trial became one of the most closely watched in Brazil's legal history. From the beginning of the trial, the prosecution laid out a comprehensive case against Bruno, focusing on his role as the mastermind behind the kidnapping and murder of Eliza. Prosecutors argued that Bruno had ordered the crime to permanently silence Eliza, who had been pursuing child support for their son, and to protect his career from the scandal that her demands threatened to cause. The prosecution's strategy centered on the testimonies of key witnesses, most notably Bruno's cousin and his close associate Luiz Henrique Romao, also known as Macarao. Romeo, who had already confessed to his role in the crime, provided a detailed account of how the murder had been planned and executed. He testified that Bruno had been the one to order the abduction and that he had personally carried out the killing under Bruno's instruction. Romeo's testimony was pivotal, as it established Bruno's direct involvement in orchestrating the crime, despite his continued denials. In addition, Bruno's cousin corroborated this account, confirming that Bruno had been fully aware of the plot and had taken steps to ensure that Eliza was silenced for good. Forensic evidence also played a key role in the trial. Although Eliza's body had never been fully recovered, police had found traces of blood and other forensic markers at the house where she had been held and killed. While the lack of a body presented a challenge for the prosecution, the forensic evidence, combined with the witness testimonies, was enough to build a solid case against Bruno. Experts testified about the evidence found at the crime scene, which supported the narrative that Eliza had been violently assaulted and murdered at the location. Throughout the trial, Bruno maintained his innocence, continuing to claim that he had no part in Eliza's death. His defense team argued that there was no direct evidence linking Bruno to the crime and that the testimonies from Romao and other witnesses were unreliable. However, the prosecution was able to systematically dismantle these arguments, pointing to the consistency of the testimonies and the forensic evidence that tied the crime to Bruno's associates. A particularly dramatic moment in the trial came when Romeo, who had once been one of Bruno's closest friends and confidants, turned to Bruno in court and publicly accused him of ordering the murder. Romeo's testimony was a turning point in the proceedings as it laid bare the internal dynamics of Bruno's circle and revealed the extent of his involvement in the crime. After several days of testimony and arguments from both sides, the jury reached a verdict. On March 8, 2013, Bruno Fernandes was found guilty of orchestrating the kidnapping, torture, and murder of Eliza Samudio. The court sentenced him to 22 years and 3 months in prison. Bruno was convicted not only for ordering the crime, but also for concealing the body and attempting to mislead authorities during the investigation. His conviction marked the end of a long and painful legal process for Eliza's family, who had been seeking justice for her brutal death. The reaction to the verdict was swift and emotional. Eliza's family, who had been present throughout the trial, expressed relief that justice had finally been served. Her mother, in particular, had been a vocal advocate for her daughter, and she spoke to the media after the conviction, expressing gratitude that Bruno had been held accountable for his actions. She called the verdict a step toward healing, though she acknowledged that nothing could truly make up for the loss of her daughter. The general public also reacted strongly to the conviction. Many had followed the case closely, and for much of Brazil, the verdict represented a victory for justice. There was widespread condemnation of Bruno, who had once been idolized as a football hero, and his fall from grace was seen as a warning about the dangers of unchecked power and violence. Activists and women's rights organizations used the case as a platform to raise awareness about domestic violence and the need for stronger legal protections for women. Despite the verdict, some of Bruno's supporters continued to believe in his innocence, a reflection of his once beloved status in Brazilian football. However, the overwhelming public reaction was one of relief that Bruno had been convicted for his role in such a horrific crime. The sentence of 22 years and 3 months, though significant, sparked debates about whether it was sufficient for the gravity of the crime. Some felt that Bruno deserved a harsher punishment, while others saw the sentence as a clear message that even powerful public figures could not escape justice. Bruno Fernandes' conviction was a landmark moment in Brazilian legal history. It not only brought closure to the Samudio family, but also highlighted broader issues of violence against women and the responsibilities of public figures. The trial and its outcome remain etched in the public memory as one of Brazil's most notorious and tragic criminal cases. In the years following his conviction, Bruno Fernandes made several controversial attempts to return to professional football. In 2017, just 7 years after his initial arrest, Bruno was released on parole pending an appeal, sparking outrage across the country. During this period, he signed a contract with Boa Esporte, a second-division football club, in a move that generated massive backlash. Supporters of women's rights and domestic violence survivors condemned the club for giving Bruno a platform to rehabilitate his public image, arguing that it sent a damaging message that violent criminals could seamlessly reintegrate into public life without paying the full consequences for their actions. Boa Esporte's decision to sign Bruno led to widespread protests, and several of the club's sponsors pulled out in response to the backlash. Despite the controversy, Bruno briefly returned to professional play, but his freedom was short-lived. In April 2017, the Brazilian Supreme Court overturned his release, and he was ordered to return to prison to complete his sentence. This attempt at a football comeback became a flashpoint for public debate over the ethics of allowing convicted criminals, especially those involved in such heinous crimes, to return to public-facing careers. The move highlighted the ongoing tension between celebrity culture and justice, with many feeling that Bruno had not sufficiently atoned for his actions. The broader legal implications of the case were significant. The trial and conviction of Bruno Fernandes prompted lawmakers and advocates to push for reforms aimed at improving protections for women facing domestic violence. Eliza's murder underscored the failure of the legal system to act on her earlier reports of abuse, leading to increased calls for the police and judiciary to take such reports more seriously. Efforts to strengthen Brazil's laws on domestic violence, including the 2006 Maria da Penha law, which was designed to curb violence against women, gained new momentum in the wake of the case. While reforms have been slow, the public awareness generated by Eliza's murder helped to shine a spotlight on these critical issues. At the heart of this tragedy is the story of Eliza's son Bruninho, who survived the ordeal. Born just months before his mother's death, Bruninho was left without either parent in the aftermath of the crime, his mother murdered, and his father imprisoned. Following Bruno's conviction, Bruninho was placed in the custody of Eliza's mother, who took on the responsibility of raising him. The boy, who carries the legacy of his mother's tragedy and his father's crime, grew up away from the public eye, under the protection of his maternal family. The future of Bruninho remains a poignant reminder of the human cost of the violence inflicted by Bruno Fernandes. While Eliza's family fought to ensure that he would grow up in a safe environment, free from the shadow of his father's notoriety, the psychological impact of such a traumatic start in life is undeniable. Over time, Bruninho became a symbol of resilience, but also of the deep scars left by domestic violence. The Eliza Samudio case continues to resonate in Brazilian society long after the trial ended. It remains a stark example of the dangers posed by domestic violence, the responsibilities of public figures, and the importance of holding those in power accountable. Though justice was ultimately served, the legacy of the case serves as a reminder of the work still needed to protect vulnerable individuals, especially women, from abuse and violence. If you found this video informative, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into true crime stories. Turn on notifications so you're the first to know when new content drops. Thanks for watching.